Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain. Today the topic of our show is the Chabahar port and the evolving geopolitics of South Asia. Today joining us from Lahore, Pakistan, we have Syed Alizia Jaffery, the sub-editor of Global Village Space, globalvillagespace.com. Our second guest joining us from London, Adam Garrie, the managing editor at the Duran, theduran.com. Welcome to our show, Ali. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you, Zain, for inviting me to discuss a very important topic, one that had to be discussed.
Welcome to our show, Adam Garrie. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Adam, let's get to the first question. Give us a brief overview of the Chabahar port. When was it envisioned and what was its objective?
Well, initially it came about in 1983, and this was when Iran was fighting a war with Iraq. The rationale to develop the port at that time would be a desire upon the Iranian side to avoid trade in the Persian Gulf because of perceived and real Iraqi dominance there. And so pivoting away from the Arab world, Iran began to think east at that time. That was the initial rationale for building the port. In the 21st century, this changed because of Indian involvement. India began long periods of discussion with the Iranian government about developing the port for shipping routes that would essentially cover the shipment of supplies from Afghanistan and other parts of the world to India. And of course, this would be a back and forth phenomenon, as all shipping routes are. Now, these discussions sort of reached a peak in around 2006, but because of the strong sanctions against Iran, Iran wasn't really in a position to be doing any deals with countries like India that are part of the overall global financial system. So this was put on hold, but the two sides continued to discuss more and more, and a quite large agreement was signed just last year in 2016, whereby Indian banks would inject increasing amounts of finance capital into the port, and Indian companies would begin developing one of the port basins to make it ready for modern shipping. Now, these are the logistical, historical and present trends that are associated with Chabahar port, but the geopolitical trajectory is as follows. India, of course, and this is especially true under the Modi regime, has an interest in isolating Pakistan from the opportunities which are inherent in the China-Pakistan economic corridor. The Indians have the idea that if they invest a lot of money in the Iranian port, it will essentially take the wind out of the sails of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, making the India to Iran route preferable. It also serves, from the Indian perspective, as an opportunity to essentially encircle Pakistan and isolate the China-Pakistan economic corridor in so doing. Now, that's the Indian aim. The Iranian aim, though, is very different, in spite of the fact that Iran is partnering with India on this project. Iran simply wants to diversify its global trade as it continues to think east. Iran no longer has the problems with the Arab world that it did in the 1980s. Far from it, one could say that in terms of modern history, that Iran's influence in the Arab world is now wider than ever. But because of this, Iran doesn't want to tie itself in either west-looking towards the Arab world nor east-looking. It wants to do both. And this is an opportunity for Iran to get capital at a time when such things have proved difficult. CPOA, but that certainly made things a lot easier, while opening up Iran routes to the further east. It doesn't, however, share the ideological and economic zeal to isolate Pakistan that India does. So we've got two partners working on this, with, of course, the Afghan government, but each is approaching the geopolitical implications from a very different perspective.
Ali, do you see India's maiden shipment through Chabahar as a real milestone as India is claiming it to be?
Well, when they sent their shipment from Kandala to Afghanistan via Gwadar, they boasted of it being a very big milestone. But unfortunately for India, does not realize the fact that one, that Gwadar port and Chabahar port are two different things. And if India is to consider it just a trading, just a conduit for trade, fair enough, that's fine. But if it wants to use Chabahar as a port which can ingress into Afghanistan without being impeded, it is certainly delusional about it. Because one, that as far as trade is concerned, I agree, Pakistan did not give overland rights. India had to figure out a way to trade their goods to Afghanistan. So they did it. But the route is fraught with danger. The Taliban are sitting on that route when the caravan would cross to Afghanistan. There would be an increasing risk of a Taliban attack or any militant attack for that matter. And even if that caravan moves through, that's all. That's about it. So I don't think so that India, why India is calling it a benchmark for future strategic operations inside Afghanistan, because one, that Chabahar port cannot sustain that much of trade as for instance Gwadar can. And the other thing that I want to point out is that India, who wants to control or expand its tentacles in the region and beyond, is not mindful of the fact that it has lost the game to Russia already in the north-south corridor. And this, if you link it with the fact that Iran does not share India's venom or spite for the One Belt, One Road initiative. If anything, it wants to combine its trade ambitions with the One Belt, One Road initiative. It even wants to join CPEC, and it is indeed in a process of having a partnership with China on that regard. And if I were to put it, they want to have a rail link between Chabahar and Gwadar, because the propensity of Gwadar to be a great trading hub is way more than Chabahar, and this is what Iran realizes. So Iran would definitely not share India's ambition of putting China on a tightrope. And two more things: India cannot influence Iran. Iran adopts a very independent foreign policy. And if I quote Kissinger said that Iran is the most nationalistic country in the region. It follows a policy based on national interests, which is pure realism. And Kissinger was very mindful of that when he spoke about Iran. So neither Iran would be willing to lessen its spite for the US nor Israel, and which I mean to say that India is a partner of both both America and Israel. So yes, as a tactical measure, India should be chuffed about the fact that they have got access to Chabahar, but in fact I see in the future China investing more in Chabahar than India can ever imagine to do. So this is where I think India needs to just hold its horses for now, and just see it nothing more than a trading conduit.
Adam, let's get to a very important question. How do you see the Chabahar port helping India ingress into Afghanistan?
Well, the idea is that the opening of the port will be combined with activities in Afghanistan, including the building of a railway, including the processing of iron and steel and other of the many mineral resources that Afghanistan has. And from there, they would be shipped to the port and then shipped around the world from there. The problem with this is, while Iran, of course, is stable and Chabahar itself is not in any conflict zone per se, Afghanistan is completely unstable, and Trump's new troop surge, as he calls it, has only increased the instability in Afghanistan. It's no secret that the United States is in Afghanistan primarily to exploit its resources, everything from poppies to precious metals and many other things that the rich country below the surface has. Because of this, they're going to try to make things on the surface as difficult as possible. This means that the overarching plan that India has for Chabahar and its tandem projects in Afghanistan are only ever going to be partially realized. This, in a logical world, would be an argument for India and Iran both seeing Chabahar as being something which could be a kind of tributary in addition to Gwadar, which is a more substantial port. And because of that, it could manage the flow of traffic in the wider region a lot easier. Instead, the idea that it's somehow going to be a competing port where one has railways in Afghanistan replacing or being a kind of competition to the China-Pakistan economic corridor, it just simply isn't feasible at this time because of the political instability in Afghanistan. India might not want to acknowledge this, but Iran knows it. Iran no longer has the mentality of the 1990s and is willing to engage in a peace, in a pragmatic peace process for Afghanistan. This is the same position that is held by China, Russia, Pakistan, and many others. Iran is willing to diversify in all directions, and it's well aware of the limitations in Afghanistan, but because of its proximity to Afghanistan as a neighbor, it realizes that eventually, because the US can be there for a long time, but they can't be there forever, there will be partnerships to be had between Iran and Afghanistan. But the time for that simply isn't now. It can certainly be worked on, but it really can't happen until a proper peace process is in place in Afghanistan. Win-win cooperation between Pakistan, China, and Iran, however, is already taking place in some shapes, and it could expand far more right here today. India could probably participate too in one way or another, but they would have to, again, lose this attitude and get on board the win-win mentality that, of course, China defines, but that in practice both Pakistan and Iran are increasingly gearing towards.
Ali, shouldn't Iran's partnership with India worry Pakistan? And how can Islamabad strengthen its ties with Iran, and why is it important?
All right. Zain, I wrote an article in the news where I titled it as chest thumping and jingoism. Unfortunately, Pakistan has been afflicted by one important drawback, that being how we resort to zero-sum mentality in our diplomacy. We have this fallacious thinking that a state cannot operate at multiple levels, which is absolutely wrong. It is highly likely that one state will befriend you and also befriend your enemy. This happens everywhere. So the perception developing in Pakistan is that because Iran and India has a tactical relationship, that means we should cut off our ties with Iran. I simply disagree with this notion, and I really pay kudos to my military and civilian leadership on how they have actually tried to mend fences with Iran. Full props to them for not jumping in the Yemen conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Full props to them for not jumping in the Qatar conflict, which emanated from Trump's speech in the Riyadh summit. And then I would like to commend the army chief for paying a longish visit to Iran, where he symbolically met the officials of the IRGC. Now, the IRGC has been berated left, right, and center by the international establishment. So, Pakistan, which is at times considered tilted towards Saudi Arabia, going and meeting IRGC is quite new and is quite an aberration. And it shows what? It shows that Pakistan and Iran both realize the fact that they have a few important commonalities which they cannot ignore. One, that they have a shared history and shared culture. The other thing is, I was talking to a former diplomat who served in Iran for about 6 years. He said that India cannot substitute Pakistan in Iran or Afghanistan for that matter. Iran and Pakistan, by virtue of being neighbors and by virtue of their proximity, must mend their fences. It is not in the interest of the region and both countries that these two should not be on good terms. There are some tactical differences which Pakistan has started to improve, and Iran too, of course. Terrorism is a big problem on our borders, and it has to be resolved. Pakistan has to make certain things very clear to Iran that yes, you can do trade with India, but you cannot harbor our terrorists inside Iran. That cannot work. But the fact that this relationship has been marred by the fact that Indian propaganda regarding their highly touted relationship with Iran has, infested the minds of Pakistanis. The Supreme Leader, on many occasions, especially in June this year, spoke about the atrocities being committed by India in Kashmir. Now that drew a lot of praise in Pakistan and a lot of ire in India. So what I meant to say is that Pakistan needs to improve ties, and it has the propensity to improve ties because of a few reasons, and those are that we need to see the common enemy. Although there are no enemies, there are no permanent enemies and friends in international relations, but there are certain states which are enemies to one another in perpetuity, I would rather say. And Iran and the US are actual enemies in the international arena. They have no love lost for each other. They do not intend to improve ties, and ties are going from bad to worse to being atrociously worse. And on the cusp, I would like to say they're on the cusp of a big confrontation. So this is where Pakistan has to play its cards very well. They've already decided to cooperate in Afghanistan. There was a report about a few days back that Pakistan has lost its influence to the Taliban and Iran has taken its place. So Pakistan and Iran have one important factor where they can immediately cooperate, and that is Afghanistan. And the other thing is, as you know, Lebanon has also opened up as a front between Saudi Arabia and Iran. All the more reason for Pakistan to exploit the growing tiff between USA and Iran, and Saudi Arabia too for that matter, to improve its own ties. Use Iranian hate for America to your own advantage. Why are you making your relationship hostage to the fact that India and Iran are having a good tactical relationship? As I've explained earlier, India cannot harm us through Iran. I say this with a great deal of conviction. Mere tactical relationships with India cannot give any other states, or states for that matter, the opportunity to harm you in a way that we that we pull the plug on Iran. This cannot happen. This should not happen. In fact, if India is ingressing in Iran, we should ingress in Iran as well. And it is very good for our, we have sectarian fault lines in the country. So we need to keep a balance. I know it's very difficult. We are walking on a tightrope. We must not estrange Saudi Arabia, and we must not estrange Iran. We must have an honorable relationship with both of them. And the way to do is that work on common ground, work on commonalities. And there are plenty of commonalities between Pakistan and Iran. Business being one, Pakistan must pay heed to the demands of establishing a rail link between Iranian Chabahar and Pakistan's Gwadar. Gwadar is not a rival to Chabahar and vice versa. Gwadar has much more potential than Chabahar. Chabahar is just a trading port. Gwadar is a deep sea port. It can be a crutch to many trading incursions and excursions in the region and beyond. Chabahar does not offer that much depth in the strategic and the tactical realm as well. So Pakistan, as Army Chief pretty rightly initiated a full program to engage Iran, must continue this effort in the days to come, because it's very important. We must become allies. Our proximity dictates this very assertion.
Adam, let's get to you. Does the Chabahar port pose a threat to Gwadar port? Can the two be connected?
I think that the two have to be connected, because the very nature of Chabahar port, from its location to the fact that it isn't a deep sea port, to the complexities of the geopolitical relations between the countries involved, would dictate the following. Gwadar can exist without Chabahar, but Chabahar can never reach tremendous potential without cooperation with Gwadar, and that means with Pakistan. This could develop and manifest itself in the following ways. Pakistan is already an important part of the One Belt, One Road. As I said earlier, the China-Pakistan economic corridor is possibly the most important transit route and hub of the entire One Belt, One Road. Iran very much wants to increase its cooperation with China, its cooperation with Russia, and its burgeoning relations with Pakistan, which I agree with Ali, are being engaged in very wisely by the Pakistani leadership, even though some of the Pakistani media are still stuck in the past, which isn't surprising. A lot of the time media, whether it's Russia, China, European, wherever, they don't realize that alliances change, that international relations are very multifaceted, and that what was true 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago isn't going to be true in the future. So the relationship between Iran and Pakistan needs to be pragmatic from both sides. And I see great potential in the leadership on both sides in engaging in this kind of cooperative and pragmatic relationship. The other factor that was mentioned before, and I think we ought to mention it again, is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is undergoing profound change right now. Mohammed bin Salman is probably going to be crowned king within a week or less. Some are saying that it might happen in the next 48 hours. He is someone who's very interesting in many ways. He's the one that has been primarily responsible for the Saudi rapprochement, let's call it, with Russia. We saw the king, the current king, travel to Moscow for the first time that any Saudi monarch has done so. Mohammed bin Salman has also done a lot of work to develop good ties with China. Now, how can Saudi Arabia try to dictate Pakistan's pivot towards Iran when Saudi Arabia itself is pivoting towards countries that are close strategic partners of Iran? It's simply impossible. And what's more is that just as the United States found out that Pakistan cannot be so easily bullied in respect of the rhetoric on Afghanistan, that nor can it be bullied by Saudi Arabia, whose previous good relations with Pakistan have been all about financial financial injections. So where the US tried to once give Pakistan a kind of security blanket and an access to a wider geopolitical world that a superpower can afford, now Pakistan's relationship with two other superpowers, China number one and Russia an increasingly important number two for Pakistan, Pakistan can tell the United States exactly what it thinks. And many ministers and many people from the foreign ministry, I saw their comments after the recent Rex Tillerson visit, and I was frankly very proud that the comments were honest, they were articulate, they were diplomatic, but they told the United States exactly what the Pakistani position is in respect of Afghanistan and to a degree in respect of India too. So because of this, Saudi Arabia isn't going to have as easy a time telling Pakistan who its allies should and shouldn't be. And frankly, any country that forces a zero-sum mentality on another isn't really a true friend in the first place, especially when it comes to business where there are partners, which is the word Russian diplomats use a lot in this situation, but no real friends. So I think the key is cooperation. Gwadar is one of the most exciting deep water ports in the world, and it may become one of the most important ports in the world as One Belt, One Road continues to develop. In this sense, Chabahar can be an important hub that is in a wider network that is centered around ports like Gwadar. This again is using the win-win mentality of China to try to develop this. If indeed both ports were part of the belts that make up One Belt, One Road, one could see this developing very effectively. Of course, Iran has no desire to have bad relations with India, and it has no desire to force India to choose. The danger is that India, of all of the countries I mentioned, I would say even more than Saudi Arabia, which is famously ideological because of the Wahhabi government, I would say that in many ways the Hindutva mentality that we see in India is in many ways even more ideological and more tunnel vision than even a Wahhabi mentality that we see in Saudi Arabia. India has an idea that it is intent on building a parallel system to One Belt, One Road, so it will have its railways, its ports, its shipping routes, its allies, and nobody else can have them. This attitude just doesn't work in the modern world. And that, for that reason alone, and there are of course many other technical reasons that we could also get into, but for that primary reason, anything that India and its partners do to try to compete with One Belt, One Road will end up being inferior, because a system based on strategic uncooperation is never going to be better than a system based on strategic partnerships. So in this sense, Gwadar has the advantage both because of its physical attributes and because of the mentality that's been taken by the Pakistani government, the army, the security services. And so the message Pakistan should give to Iran, and it's one that Iran is absolutely willing to hear, is that we're willing to cooperate and make Chabahar more useful than it right now is. Iran won't be upset about that. Iran wants to develop relations with as many countries as possible. And just finally, one thing that might harm India's own future more than its own government is the fact that the United States has been looking at India's cooperation with Iran, and they've been watching with a bit of anger. The United States is desperate to use India as a kind of pawn to upset China's progress, to upset the relationship between China and Pakistan, and Modi is, of course, a sort of willing accomplice in this process. But Indian businesses in particular, and the banks in India that put their money into Chabahar, they don't want to break off relations with Iran. So you have in an India-US relationship two countries that think the same way. You can only have one set of friends, and anyone who isn't in that circle is the enemy. But what happens when they disagree on who the enemy is? India doesn't see Iran as the enemy. The United States does. The things could fall apart very quickly if India has to choose between Chabahar and cooperation with Iran and being America's sort of South Asian, dare I say, puppet to upset China's progress, Pakistan's progress, and that of others. So India should be careful what it wishes for. It may just end up falling victim to its own mentality when practiced by the United States.
Ali, let's wrap things up. Tell us how the activation of Chabahar affect the geopolitical dynamics in South Asia.
The environment in the region is already very fluid, and the activation of Chabahar has actually put the United States in a very tight spot. I would like to carry forward from where Adam left off. You know that Iran and the US are bitter enemies, as I explained earlier, and the dethronement of Trump, or the enthronement of Trump, has actually festered the rivalry to that extent where even saner elements in the US are questioning Trump. What the hell are you doing? Let sanity prevail. But Trump, although he is blabbering and babbling against Iran, but his bluster does not seem to be supportive with a fallback strategy. He wants to pull the plug on Iran by decertifying the GCPOA, but frankly speaking, he does not have a clear-cut series of tactical measures to impose his will on Iran. He has been severely beaten in Syria, which has led him to, retreat. In Iraq, it has also no mood to, keep a larger footprint of forces. So it is on the retreat. In Libya, despite it wanting to support Saudi Arabia's new surge, it is not in a position to dislodge Hezbollah in a way which would be beneficial for Saudi Arabia and the US for that matter, because Hezbollah's military prowess exceeds that of the Lebanese military and all the rivals that it has to face. So the problem that I see in all that is happening in Syria and Iraq and what may happen in Libya is that America may try to do something very silly in this region. They want to hurt Iran, but they're unable to hurt Iran as of now. So here I would like to concur with Adam that it may in the future go on to hurt Chabahar, as one of the foremost experts on the region from the US, Michael Kugelman, also expressed his dismay about the fact that because of US hating Iran, Chabahar and Gwadar port both are lumped together as the two most hated projects in the region, although there is no sane reason for America to hate these projects of connectivity. So my problem, or my contention, if you call it, is that the Americans may do something pretty silly. They may even ask India to, curtail its relationship with Iran. It hasn't asked India to do so right as of now, but it can. I do not trust Trump to come up with a plausible strategy to counter Iran. And as we all know, Iran is in no mood to back off. Iran has categorically said that they would continue to ameliorate their missile program, come what may, because they have the bitter memories of the Iran-Iraq war still lingering in their head. So they cannot. The more you pressurize them, the more they would become brazen. So America now has two obsessions in the region. One is that it has to counter China and for that it has India as a satellite state. Um, the fact that the US openly supported India on CPEC was a precursor of things to come. It is believed that CPEC would dictate whatever happens between India, Pakistan and the US. Besides, the US wants to counter China in Afghanistan, so the brunt would be borne by Pakistan. So the US has some levers to pull the plug on China in the region by using India. But with Iran, it's a different ball game. India does not want to sever ties with Iran. It wants to strengthen them. But does the US want any country in the region to have quote unquote strong, robust and forward-looking ties with Iran? I don't think so. So this obsession to bleed Iran by hook or by crook may affect Indo-US strategic relationship. Although it's a rather far-fetched comment as of now, but I do not trust Trump to act as a sage. He may do something very nonsensical, because whatever he is doing to counter Iran is proving counterproductive, because Iran has said that, okay, if you want to wriggle out of the JCPOA, so be it. We can convert from LEU to HEU within about 5 days, and then who knows, when states are faced with the threat of being targeted, they always resort to add the nuclear layer to their arsenal. And I have no doubts in saying this, that Iran not only had the willingness, but it also had the ability to go nuclear before 2003. It had yellow cakes, it had the sites where uranium can be enriched. So if Mr. Trump tries to put exceeding pressure on Iran, then Iran may do what the world does not want it to do. And the other important thing is that my worry pertains to America, to the fact that America would try to hurt Iran by destabilizing this region further. It may launch, or I would say it may ramp up the hybrid war inside Pakistan, especially in Balochistan, to sow the seeds of discord between Iran and Pakistan. As my friend and geopolitical scholar Andrew Koripko pointed out in his article for our website, that the US might not be chuffed about the fact that Pakistan is getting closer with Iran. So they may ratchet it up, their war inside Balochistan, so that Pakistan and Iran can not get closer, which they are trying to do. So this makes for a very interesting geopolitical chessboard in the region. And the most important thing is that whatever is happening in the Middle East will have a direct bearing on what may happen in this region. And the more Saudi Arabia and Iran fight, they are having a very virulent tiff in Yemen, and whatever is happening in Lebanon, it has further increased doubts of a conflict, of a confrontation between the two countries. So Pakistan finds itself in a very tightrope in that regard. It has to balance off because there is a proclivity in Pakistan that sectarianism may be used to play the ongoing proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So Pakistan has to be very careful in this regard. Otherwise, I think Pakistan has taken a very good step of engaging Iran, and it is being done by both the civilian and military leadership since the start of 2017. But still, some interesting times ahead in this region.
Thank you so much, Syed Ali Jaffery, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Zain, for inviting me to discuss a very important topic, one that had to be discussed.
Thank you so much, Adam Garrie, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
It's a great pleasure. I hope to do it again soon.
This was Syed Ali Jaffery joining us from Lahore, Pakistan, the sub-editor of Global Village Space. And also joining us from London, Adam Garrie, the managing editor of the Duran, theduran.com. We were discussing the Chabahar port and the evolving geopolitics of South Asia. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.